When they bound Arden to Prince Lucian, they thought they were breaking her spirit. The council's verdict rang through the ancient hall like a death sentence, punishment for a woman who dared speak when wolves demanded silence. Marriage to the Alpha Prince, a man whose hands were said to drip with the blood of his enemies, whose cold eyes had never shown mercy. What no one knew was that beneath her quiet defiance, Arden had already survived one prison, the cage of others' expectations. The daughter who could never please, the she-wolf whose scent had faded after tragedy, leaving her marked as broken. She had built walls around her heart long before they forced a wedding band onto her finger. But walls work both ways. They keep others out, yes, but they also trap secrets in. And Prince Lucian's secret was darker than the northern mountains after sunset, heavier than the ancient stone of his fortress palace. It lurked in the shadows of every glance, in the careful distance he maintained, in the haunted depths of eyes too old for his years. As the moon waxed and waned over their forced union, Arden would discover that the greatest cruelty isn't always found in hatred. Sometimes it hides in the spaces between heartbeats, in the silence of a shared bed where two bodies never touch, in the terrible weight of a countdown that only one of them understood. For in the northern territories, where wolf law ruled with tooth and claw, some punishments became salvation, and some marriages forged in hatred could become the only shield against an ancient darkness hungry for royal blood. Before we begin, remember to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Every day, a new story awaits you. Now, let us begin. The heavy wooden doors of the council chamber swung shut behind Arden with a finality that echoed through her bones. Her fate had been decided in that dim, suffocating room, where 12 pairs of eyes had looked upon her with judgment and contempt. She stood now in the corridor, her breath coming in shallow gasps, the stone walls of the ancient keep seeming to close in around her. "You should have known better." Her father's voice came from behind her, thick with disappointment, and something else. Fear, perhaps. Challenging the council's decision about the border territories? What did you think would happen? Arden turned to face him, her chin lifted despite the trembling in her limbs. "I thought they might listen to reason. The Silver Creek Pack has rights to those hunting grounds. We've shared them for generations. And now you'll pay for your defiance with the rest of your life." Her father's weathered face seemed to have aged a decade in the span of the hour-long council meeting. "Married to the Alpha Prince. God's help you." The words hung in the air between them, and Arden felt the full weight of her sentence crush against her chest. Marriage to Prince Lucian, heir to the Northern Territories, a man whose reputation for brutality preceded him like a shadow. "Father," she began, but he raised a hand to silence her. "It's done. The council has spoken. You'll be sent to the Northern Palace at dawn." His eyes, the same amber-flecked brown as her own, finally met hers. "I tried, Arden. I argued for leniency, but your actions were seen as treason. This marriage is the only thing that saved you from execution." Execution. The word should have terrified her, but somehow the alternative seemed equally grim. Stories of Prince Lucian had traveled even to their remote territory. Tales of a cold, calculating ruler who dispatched his enemies without mercy. Some said he had killed his first challenger at the age of 15, ripping out the man's throat with his bare hands. "I would rather die with dignity than live as his—" "Don't," her father's voice cracked. "Don't say it. This is how it must be. Pack your belongings. Only what you can carry." That night, Arden stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the forest that had been her home for all 22 years of her life. The moon hung heavy in the sky, its light bathing the trees in silver. She pressed her palm against the cool glass, wondering if this would be the last time she would see the familiar landscape. Dawn arrived with cruel swiftness. A convoy of sleek black vehicles waited outside the pack house, their engines humming impatiently. Arden emerged from the house wearing a simple gray dress, her dark hair falling in loose waves down her back. She carried a single bag containing clothes and a few precious books, her only companions for whatever lay ahead. Her mother embraced her fiercely, whispering hurried advice in her ear. "Keep your head down. Don't challenge him directly. Find allies where you can." "Is that how you survived your arranged marriage?" Arden asked softly, looking toward her father who stood stiffly by the cars. Her mother's eyes darkened. "Your father is a good man. The prince is something else entirely." The journey north took 3 days, through mountains and forests that grew increasingly wild and untamed. Arden barely spoke to her escorts, a team of stone-faced guards who treated her not as a bride, but as a prisoner. She spent the hours watching the landscape change, memorizing every detail as if building a map back home in her mind. On the third day, the northern palace came into view, a sprawling structure of dark stone built into the side of a mountain, its towers reaching toward the sky like accusing fingers. Unlike the warm wooden structures of her home pack, this place seemed designed to intimidate, to remind all who approached of their insignificance. "We've arrived, miss," one of the guards announced, breaking the silence that had persisted for hours. Arden stepped from the car, the bitter cold of the northern air slapping against her face. She lifted her gaze to take in the full scale of what would now be her prison. Movement at the entrance caught her eye, a delegation emerging to greet the convoy. At the center walked a tall figure, broad-shouldered and imposing. Even from a distance, there was no mistaking him. Prince Lucian moved with the predatory grace of a born alpha, his presence commanding attention without effort. As he drew nearer, Arden forced herself to stand straighter, determined not to show fear despite the rapid beating of her heart. He stopped before her, and Arden found herself looking up into eyes so pale blue they appeared almost colorless in the harsh daylight. His face might have been handsome, if not for its complete lack of warmth. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw darkened with stubble, and lips pressed into a firm line. Dark hair fell across his forehead, slightly too long, as if personal appearance was an afterthought. "Arden of the Eastern Territory," he said, his voice deeper than she had expected, resonating in the cold air. Not a question, but a statement. "Yes," she replied, refusing to lower her gaze despite every instinct screaming at her to submit to the dominant wolf before her. Something flickered in his expression, surprise perhaps at her small defiance, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "Welcome to your new home. The ceremony will take place at sunset." With that, he turned and strode back toward the palace, leaving Arden to be escorted by a stern-faced woman who introduced herself as Madame Verity, the head housekeeper. "You'll be taken to prepare," the woman informed her. "The Alpha Prince expects his bride to be presentable." The preparation was an ordeal in itself. Servants scrubbed Arden's skin until it was raw, washed her hair with perfumed oils, and dressed her in a gown of ivory and silver that felt more like armor than wedding attire. Throughout it all, she remained silent, watching the unfamiliar faces around her for any hint of kindness or potential alliance. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of blood and gold, Arden was led to the great hall where the ceremony would take place. No family waited for her there, no friends to offer support, only rows of unfamiliar faces, watching her with curiosity, and in some cases, undisguised pity. Prince Lucian stood at the far end of the hall, dressed in black, a stark contrast to her pale gown. As Arden walked toward him, each step felt like moving through deep water, resistance meeting her every movement. When she finally reached him, standing before the elder who would perform the ceremony, she noticed something unexpected. The prince's hands, clasped tightly before him, bore the faint tremor of tension. The ceremony was brief and devoid of warmth. No vows of love or protection, only words of duty and alliance. When the elder instructed the prince to mark her, the traditional claim of an alpha wolf over his mate, Arden steeled herself, tilting her head to expose the vulnerable curve of her neck. Lucian leaned in, his breath warm against her skin, and Arden closed her eyes, waiting for the sharp pain of teeth. Instead, she felt only the lightest brush of lips, a mockery of the true claiming mark. Before he withdrew, the assembled crowd would not have noticed the deception from their distance, but Arden's eyes flew open in confusion. The prince's gaze met hers, a clear warning in their icy depths. Say nothing. The reception that followed was a blur of unfamiliar faces offering congratulations that rang hollow. Arden stood beside her new husband, aware of his presence like a physical weight, though he barely acknowledged her beyond what protocol demanded. As the night wore on, the inevitability of what would follow hung over Arden like a storm cloud. The bedding ceremony, the final humiliation in this farce of a marriage. In her culture, it was symbolic rather than literal, with the couple being escorted to their chambers by ribald songs and teasing, then left alone to consummate their union in private. When the time came, she was led by a group of giggling women she didn't know to an opulent chamber dominated by a massive bed. They helped her change into a sheer nightgown, their hands impersonal and efficient, before departing with knowing smiles and whispered advice she couldn't bring herself to hear. Alone in the chamber, Arden paced, her bare feet silent on the thick carpet. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours before the door finally opened and Prince Lucian entered. He had shed his formal attire for simpler clothes, a black shirt and trousers, but he appeared no less intimidating. His gaze swept over her, pausing briefly on the thin nightgown before moving to her face. "You must be tired after your journey," he said, his voice oddly formal. "You should rest." Arden stared at him, confused. "I don't understand. What is there to misunderstand?" He moved past her to a door she hadn't noticed before, opening it to reveal an adjoining room. "You'll sleep here. I have matters to attend to elsewhere. But the council believes what I want them to believe." He cut her off, his tone sharpening. "And what I want them to believe is that this marriage is real and will be consummated. The reality is that you are here as punishment, not as my true mate. I have no interest in forcing myself on an unwilling woman, regardless of what you may have heard about me." Relief warred with suspicion in Arden's mind. Why the deception with the marking, then? Why not just go through with it? Lucian's jaw tightened. A true alpha's mark is sacred. It's not a tool for political punishment. Before she could question him further, he turned away. "There are clothes in the wardrobe. You're free to move about the palace during the day, but you will be watched. Do not attempt to contact your family or former pack members. As far as the world is concerned, you are my devoted wife." With that, he moved toward the main door. "Wait," Arden called after him. "I don't understand what you want from me." Lucian paused, his hand on the door handle. When he looked back at her, something unreadable flickered in his pale eyes. "For now, I want your silence and your cooperation. In public, you will play the role assigned to you. In private, we need not interact at all. We need not." The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Arden alone in the lavish prison that would now be her home, married to a man who clearly despised the very arrangement that bound them, a man whose reputation spoke of cruelty and bloodshed, but whose actions tonight had shown unexpected restraint. As she sank onto the edge of the bed, Arden wondered which was the true Prince Lucian, the monster from the stories, or the man who had just left her untouched on their wedding night. Outside, the moon rose high above the northern palace, bathing the stone walls in cold light as a howl, lone and haunting, echoed across the mountains. A week passed in the northern palace, each day bleeding into the next with monotonous regularity. Arden learned the rhythms of her gilded cage, when the servants would arrive with meals, which corridors were most frequently patrolled by guards, which members of the household staff might offer a genuine smile instead of wary deference. Prince Lucian remained an enigma. He appeared only when necessary, during formal dinners or council meetings where Arden was required to sit silently at his side, the perfect picture of a devoted mate. In these public moments, he played his part with cold precision, a hand at the small of her back, the occasional glance that others might interpret as affection. But as soon as they were alone, the facade dropped away, leaving only silence and distance between them. On the 8th morning, Arden woke to find a sealed envelope on the table beside her bed. Inside was a note written in sharp, angular handwriting. "Your presence is required at the council meeting this afternoon. Wear something appropriate. L." She stared at the message, turning it over in her hand as if it might reveal some hidden meaning. In their week of marriage, this was the first direct communication he had initiated. When she entered the Grand Council chamber that afternoon, dressed in a dark blue gown that belonged to her new wardrobe, all eyes turned to her. 12 council members sat around a massive table carved from a single piece of ancient oak, their expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. At the head of the table sat Lucian, his posture rigid, eyes fixed on some middle distance as if he were alone in the room. "My prince," one of the older council members spoke, his white beard trembling slightly with each word. "Is it wise to have your new bride present for matters of state security?" Lucian's gaze shifted to the man, and Arden watched as the counselor visibly recoiled from the intensity of that stare. "My wife is now a member of the Northern Pack," Lucian said, his voice betraying no emotion. "As such, she has the right to be informed of matters that may affect her safety. But her loyalty, Lucian cut in, is to me now. Isn't that right, Arden?" All eyes turned to her, and Arden felt the weight of expectation pressing down. "Of course," she replied, her voice steadier than she had expected. "My loyalty is to my husband and my new pack." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but she maintained her composure, meeting the suspicious gazes of the council members without flinching. "Very well," the white-bearded counselor conceded. "Let us proceed with the reports from the border." What followed was 2 hours of detailed discussion about patrol schedules, territorial disputes, and security concerns that Arden struggled to follow. She noted, however, the tension that seemed to build in Lucian's shoulders as the meeting progressed, particularly when the conversation turned to a series of unexplained disappearances along the northern border. 3 pack members in the last month, a severe-looking woman stated, sliding a folder across the table. No bodies recovered, no scent trails, nothing. "And the pattern?" Lucian asked, his voice tight. "The same as before," the woman replied softly, something like fear flickering across her features. All 3 had recently patrolled the Shadow Pass. A heavy silence fell over the room. Arden glanced at Lucian, noting how his knuckles had whitened where his hands gripped the arms of his chair. "Double the patrols in that area," he finally said. "No one goes alone, not even for reconnaissance." "My prince," another counselor began hesitantly, "perhaps it's time to consider what these disappearances might mean. The timing, so close to your father's anniversary." "Enough." The word cut through the room like a blade. Lucian rose to his feet, his eyes flashing with a dangerous light. "This meeting is adjourned. I want those patrol schedules on my desk by nightfall." Without another word, he strode from the room, leaving a wake of tense silence behind him. Arden sat frozen, uncertain if she should follow or remain. The decision was made for her, and the white-bearded counselor spoke again. "You would do well, princess, to avoid asking your husband about Shadow Pass," he said, his tone almost pitying. "Some histories are better left buried." Arden returned to her chambers, her mind racing with questions. What was Shadow Pass? What anniversary had the counselor mentioned? And why had Lucian's reaction been so visceral? She found no answers that day, nor in the days that followed. Lucian retreated further into himself, sometimes disappearing for entire days without explanation. On the rare occasions when they did share a meal, the silence between them stretched taut and uncomfortable. 2 weeks after the council meeting, Arden was wandering through the palace gardens, a rare indulgence permitted only because the high stone walls made escape impossible, when she noticed a figure watching her from a second-floor window. Not Lucian, but a woman she had glimpsed only briefly during her time at the palace. Later that evening, as Arden sat reading in her chambers, a soft knock at the door interrupted her solitude. When she opened it, she found a young woman standing there, her delicate features framed by copper-colored hair. "Princess Arden," the woman said with a slight bow. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," Arden replied, trying to place where she had seen this woman before. "And please, just Arden is fine." The woman smiled, the expression warming her face. "I'm Alara, the prince's sister." Surprise must have shown on Arden's face because Alara's smile widened. "He didn't mention me, did he?" Typical Lucian. No, he didn't." Arden hesitated before stepping back to allow Alara into the room. "I didn't realize he had siblings." "Just me," Alara said, moving to sit in one of the chairs by the fireplace. "And I'm only half-sister, really. Different mothers." Arden sat across from her, curiosity overcoming caution. "I've seen you around the palace, but my brother keeps me hidden away as much as possible?" Alara finished for her, a hint of bitterness in her tone. "Yes, that's Lucian's preferred method of protection. Lock away anything he cares about." The implication that Lucian cared for anything seemed at odds with everything Arden had observed about the cold, distant man she had been forced to marry. "Why are you here now, then? Won't he be angry?" Alara shrugged, a casual gesture that somehow managed to convey years of rebellion against her brother's authority. "He's gone to the borders for patrol. He won't be back until tomorrow at the earliest. And I wanted to meet you properly." Her eyes, a warmer blue than her brother's icy gaze, studied Arden with open interest. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone more broken, I suppose. The council's choice of punishment is well known, and my brother's reputation even more so. Yet here you are, still standing tall." Arden felt a flush of pride at the assessment, though she wasn't sure it was entirely earned. "It's only been a few weeks. Perhaps the breaking happens more slowly." Alara's expression sobered. "Has he been cruel to you?" The question caught Arden off guard. "No," she admitted after a moment. "Distant, yes. Cold, certainly. But not cruel." Relief softened Alara's features. Good. That's good. You sound surprised. Not surprised exactly. Relieved. Alara leaned forward, her voice dropping as if worried about being overheard despite the empty chambers. My brother isn't what people think he is. What is he then? Alara hesitated, conflict playing across her expressive face. It's not my story to tell, but I will say this. The reputation that precedes him was carefully cultivated, and for reasons more complex than simple power. Before Arden could press for more information, Alara rose to her feet. I should go. The staff will report my visit to him when he returns, but I'd rather not push my luck by staying too long. Wait, Arden said, rising as well. What is Shadow Pass? And what anniversary were the counselors referring to? Alara went very still, her face draining of color. Who told you about Shadow Pass? No one told me anything, Arden explained, describing the council meeting and the reaction it had provoked from Lucian. Alara seemed to wrestle with herself before finally sighing. Shadow Pass is a ravine at the northernmost edge of our territory. 10 years ago, our father was found dead there. His body. She swallowed hard. His body was torn apart in a way no normal wolf or human could have managed. Arden felt a chill run down her spine. What happened? Officially? A rogue wolf attack. But there were inconsistencies, things that never made sense. Lucian was 17 when it happened. He became alpha far too young, with enemies circling like vultures, waiting for him to show weakness. And the recent disappearances? The council seemed to think they were connected. Alara's expression darkened. I don't know. Lucian doesn't discuss pack security with me. She moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. Be careful, Arden. My brother's secrets are dangerous, and not just to him. After Alara left, Arden found herself too restless to return to her book. Instead, she decided to explore the palace, something she had done only tentatively until now. With Lucian away, the ever-present sense of being watched had diminished slightly. Her wanderings led her to a corridor she had not visited before, its walls lined with portraits of stern-faced men and women who shared the same sharp features as her husband. Ancestors, she presumed. Generations of alphas who had ruled the Northern Territory. At the end of the hall, a heavy oak door stood partially ajar. Curiosity pulled her forward, and she pushed it open to reveal what appeared to be a private study. Unlike the cold, formal spaces of the rest of the palace, this room felt lived in. Books were stacked on tables, papers spread across a massive desk, a half-empty glass of amber liquid sitting forgotten on a side table. Lucian's personal space, she realized with a start. She knew she should leave, that this intrusion would not be welcomed if discovered. Yet something compelled her to step inside, to seek some understanding of the man who was now her husband in name, if not in truth. The desk was covered in maps and reports, many marked with Lucian's angular handwriting. Arden scanned them briefly, recognizing references to the patrols and the disappearances discussed in the council meeting. Nothing revelatory, nothing that explained the tension that had filled the room at the mention of Shadow Pass. She was about to turn away, when her eye caught on a leather-bound book, partially hidden beneath a stack of papers. Unlike the official documents scattered across the desk, this appeared personal, the leather worn with handling, the pages slightly yellowed with age. Arden hesitated, her conscience warring with curiosity. This was a violation of privacy, a breach of the uneasy truce that existed between her and Lucian. But the memory of Alara's words, "My brother's secrets are dangerous," pulled at her. With one ear alert for approaching footsteps, she carefully lifted the book and opened it to find a journal. The first entry was dated 10 years earlier, the handwriting that of a younger Lucian, less disciplined but recognizable. Father is dead. They're calling it an attack by rogues, but I saw the body. No rogue did that. The council wants me to accept their version of events, to take my place as alpha and move forward as if nothing unusual has happened. But I know better. This was him. It has to be. The legends are true, and if they are, then everything else might be true as well. Arden's heart hammered against her ribs as she turned to the next entry, dated a week later. I found the old texts in the sealed section of the library. They speak of the curse, just as grandmother used to before father forbade her from telling those superstitious tales. A blood debt, passed down through generations. The firstborn son of each alpha, marked for sacrifice on their 30th year. Father would have been 30 next month. I have 13 years to find a way to break it, or I'll be next. The sound of voices in the corridor outside snapped Arden back to the present. She quickly replaced the journal, arranging the papers as she had found them, and slipped out of the study. Her mind raced with what she had read. A curse, a sacrifice, a countdown that had begun a decade ago. If the journal was accurate, Lucian was now 27. 3 years left before whatever fate had claimed his father came for him as well. Arden returned to her chambers, her thoughts in turmoil. The cold, distant man she had been forced to marry suddenly appeared in a different light. Not a monster, perhaps, but a man living under the shadow of an approaching doom. That night, unable to sleep, Arden stood at her window, looking out at the moonlit mountains that surrounded the palace. Somewhere out there, Lucian was patrolling with his guards, perhaps tracking whatever had taken those 3 missing pack members. Was it connected to this curse? Was he searching for answers? For some way to break the cycle that threatened to claim his life as it had claimed his father's? As the moon reached its zenith, a howl echoed across the valley, deep and resonant, carrying both authority and a haunting note of solitude. Without thinking, Arden found herself responding, her own wolf rising to the surface as she tilted her head back and let out an answering call. The night fell silent for a long moment before the howl came again, closer this time, as if drawn to her response. Arden stood at the window long after the howling had ceased, her wolf senses alert for any sign of the alpha's return. When sleep finally claimed her in the early hours of morning, her dreams were filled with shadowed ravines, torn bodies, and a countdown ticking inexorably toward 0. She woke to find Lucian standing at the foot of her bed, still dressed in the clothes he had worn for patrol, dirt and what looked like blood staining the dark fabric. His face was haggard, deep shadows beneath his eyes suggesting he had not slept. "You were in my study," he said without preamble, his voice rough with exhaustion. "What did you see?" Arden sat up slowly, pulling the covers around her as if they might offer some protection against the intensity of his gaze. I found your journal." Something like resignation passed across his features. "And now you know. Is it true?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "This curse? Is that what happened to your father?" Lucian closed his eyes briefly, a muscle working in his jaw. When he looked at her again, the walls he normally maintained had cracked, allowing her to glimpse the weight he carried. "Yes," he said simply. "It's true, and you have 3 years left." He nodded once, a sharp, jerky movement. "Unless I can find a way to break it. That's why the council arranged this marriage, you know. They believe an alpha needs an heir before he dies. Insurance for the pack's future." The cold calculation of it made Arden's stomach turn. "So I'm not just a punishment for my defiance, I'm a broodmare." "You're neither, as far as I'm concerned," Lucian said, some of his usual sharpness returning to his tone. "I never agreed to their plan. I only agreed to the marriage to save you from execution, at Alara's insistence." This revelation startled Arden. "Your sister asked you to spare me?" She said enough blood had been spilled for pack politics. His gaze dropped to his hands, and Arden noticed they were trembling slightly. "I need to know what else you saw in my study. Nothing specific about the curse, just what was in the journal." Arden hesitated, then added, "But I heard about Shadow Pass from your sister. About your father's death." Lucian's expression hardened. "Alara talks too much. She cares about you, and she's worried." She should be," he said, turning away. "We all should be." As he moved toward the door, Arden called after him. "The recent disappearances, are they connected to the curse?" Lucian paused, his hand on the door handle. "I believe so. It's awakening, becoming more active as my 30th year approaches." He glanced back at her, his pale eyes haunted. "Stay away from my study, Arden. And stay away from Shadow Pass. Whatever happens to me, I won't have more blood on my conscience." With that, he was gone, leaving Arden alone with the knowledge that her forced husband was living under a death sentence, and that the clock was ticking down more quickly than anyone had realized. Outside, the first light of dawn broke over the mountains, bathing the northern palace in golden light that did nothing to dispel the shadows that seemed to cling to its stone walls. Shadows that Arden now understood were not just physical, but manifestations of a darker, more ancient threat than she could have imagined. 10 days after discovering Lucian's secret, Arden found herself in the palace library, surrounded by ancient texts and crumbling scrolls. The vast room, with its soaring ceilings and towering shelves, had become her sanctuary, a place where she could search for answers without constantly being observed by the ever-present palace guards. "You won't find anything useful in those," a voice said from behind her, causing Arden to nearly drop the fragile parchment she'd been examining. Alara stood in the doorway, arms crossed over her chest, her copper hair braided tightly against her head. Unlike their previous meeting, her expression now held no warmth, only a wary concern. "What makes you think I'm looking for something specific?" Arden asked, carefully returning the parchment to its protective sleeve. "Because I know my brother told you." Alara moved into the room, closing the door behind her with a soft click. "About the curse." Arden didn't bother to deny it. "Then you also know why I'm searching. There must be some way to break it. Do you think Lucien hasn't tried?" Alara's voice carried an edge of bitterness. "For 10 years he's hunted for answers. He's consulted every elder, every ancient text, even traveled to speak with mystics beyond our territories. If there were an easy solution to be found in these books, don't you think he would have found it by now?" "Maybe he missed something," Arden insisted, though doubt crept into her voice. "Maybe a fresh perspective could get you killed," Alara cut in sharply. "The curse isn't just some abstract threat, Arden. It's active, hunting. The more you probe, the more likely you are to draw its attention." A chill ran down Arden's spine at these words. "Is that what happened to the missing pack members? They drew its attention?" Alara's silence was answer enough. "Tell me what you know," Arden pressed. "Please. I can't help if I'm working blind." "Why would you want to help?" Alara asked, genuine confusion in her tone. "This isn't your fight. This marriage was forced on you as punishment. Lucien isn't your true mate, just your jailer." The words stung with truth, yet Arden found herself bristling at them. "No one deserves to die like that. Not even my jailer." Alara studied her for a long moment, as if searching for some hidden motive. Finally, she sighed and sank into one of the library chairs. "The curse began 5 generations ago, when our ancestor, Alpha Thorn, made a pact with something ancient and dark to save our pack during a brutal winter. Food was scarce, rival packs were attacking, and our people were dying. In desperation, Thorn sought help from what the old texts call the shadow that walks." "A demon?" Arden asked, settling into a chair across from Alara. "Something older, I think. A being that existed in these mountains long before wolves or humans claimed the territory." Alara's gaze drifted to the window, where the peaks were visible against the clear blue sky. "The shadow granted Thorn strength and power beyond any alpha before him. Our pack not only survived that winter, but emerged as the dominant force in the northern territories. At what cost? The shadow demanded the firstborn son of each alpha as payment, to be collected when they reached 30 years of age. Thorn, believing he had outsmarted the entity, agreed, only to discover when his son turned 30 that the shadow would indeed collect its due." Arden leaned forward. "What exactly happens? How does it take them?" Alara's face paled slightly. "No one knows exactly. The victims simply vanish near Shadow Pass, though sometimes—" She hesitated, swallowing hard. "Sometimes parts are found later, enough to confirm death, not enough to provide proper burial." The clinical description did nothing to mask the horror behind it. Arden thought of Lucien's father, torn apart in a way no normal wolf or human could have managed, according to Alara's earlier account. And there's no way to fight it? To kill this shadow? Many have tried. None have succeeded. Alara's voice dropped lower. "Our grandmother believed there might be a way to transfer the debt, for someone to willingly take the Alpha's place. But even if that were true, Lucien would never accept such a sacrifice. Is that why he keeps everyone at a distance?" Arden asked, pieces falling into place. "To ensure no one would be willing to take his place?" A sad smile touched Alara's lips. "That, and to protect himself from the pain of attachment when he knows his time is limited. After our father's death, Lucien changed. He built walls around himself, became the cold, ruthless alpha everyone now fears. It was easier, I think, to be feared than pitied." The image of the man Arden had come to know, distant, guarded, yet surprisingly principled in his own way, shifted in her mind. What she had interpreted as cruelty might instead be a calculated distance maintained out of some misguided sense of protection. "The council knows about the curse," Arden said, thinking of the tension in the meeting room. "Yet they arranged our marriage anyway. Why?" "Because they need an heir," Alara replied, bitterness creeping into her tone. "And because they've given up on saving Lucien. Their focus now is on ensuring pack continuity after he's gone." "And Lucien agreed to this arrangement?" He agreed to the marriage to save you from execution, as he told you, but he's refused to produce an heir. He says he won't risk passing the curse to another generation. This revelation struck Arden with unexpected force. She had assumed Lucian's refusal to touch her was born of disgust or indifference. The idea that it might instead be a form of protection, for her and for any potential children, cast his actions in a new light. "What about you?" Arden asked suddenly. "You're his sister. Couldn't you lead the pack if he dies?" Elara finished for her. "I'm only half northern wolf. My mother was from the southern packs, considered weaker by many of our people. The council would never accept me as alpha." Her lips curved in a humorless smile. "Besides, Lucian has never trained me for leadership. Another of his protections, I suspect." A clock somewhere in the library chimed the hour, and Elara rose to her feet. "I should go. Lucian will be returning from patrol soon, and it's better if he doesn't find us conspiring." "We're not conspiring," Arden protested. "We're trying to help him." "Against his wishes," Elara pointed out, "which makes it conspiracy in his eyes." She moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at Arden with a curious expression. "You care about what happens to him, don't you? Despite everything." The question caught Arden off guard. Did she care? A few weeks ago, she would have laughed at the suggestion. Yet now, knowing what she did about the burden Lucian carried, the death sentence hanging over his head, she couldn't deny the tug of empathy she felt. "I care about justice," she finally said. "And there's nothing just about this curse." Elara nodded, seeming satisfied with this answer. "Be careful, Arden. The library is safer than most places, but nowhere in this palace is truly secure from watchful eyes." With that warning, she slipped out, leaving Arden alone among the ancient texts once more. That evening, as darkness settled over the mountains, Arden stood on the balcony of her chambers, watching as patrol groups returned from their rounds. Among them was Lucian, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. Something in his posture, a slight slump to shoulders that normally remained rigidly straight, suggested exhaustion beyond the physical. When a knock came at her door an hour later, she was surprised to find Lucian standing there, still in his patrol clothes, a smudge of dirt across one cheekbone. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice rough with fatigue. Arden stepped aside, her curiosity overriding caution. In all their time as reluctant spouses, he had never sought her out in her private chambers. Lucian entered, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on her. "Elara tells me you've been researching the curse." Of course she had. Arden should have known her conversation with Elara wouldn't remain secret for long. "Yes," she admitted, seeing no point in denial. She expected anger, perhaps a repetition of his warning to stay away from his private matters. Instead, Lucian merely looked tired. "Why?" he asked simply. "Because it's wrong," Arden replied, matching his directness. No one should have to face a death sentence for a bargain they didn't make. Something flickered in his pale eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or a shadow of the vulnerability she had glimpsed that morning in her bedroom. "It's not your concern." "You made it my concern when you married me," Arden countered, a flash of her old defiance returning. "Forced or not, we're bound together now. What affects you affects me." Lucian's jaw tightened. "This marriage is a formality, a political arrangement that saved your life. Nothing more. Is that why you've kept your distance? To maintain the fiction that this is just politics?" Arden took a step closer, emboldened by the knowledge she now possessed. "Or is it because you're afraid to form attachments when you know your time is limited?" His eyes flashed with anger, but beneath it, Arden sensed a deeper emotion. Fear, perhaps, or the pain of a wound touched too directly. "You know nothing about me," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous softness. "I know you're carrying a burden that would crush most people," Arden replied, refusing to be intimidated. "I know you've spent 10 years searching for a way to break a curse that should never have been yours to bear. And I know you've pushed away everyone who might help you because you're afraid of dragging them down with you." Lucian moved with the preternatural speed of an alpha wolf, closing the distance between them in an instant. His hands gripped her shoulders, not painfully, but with enough force to hold her in place, his face inches from hers. "Listen carefully," he said, each word precise and deliberate. "This curse doesn't just kill its victims, it destroys everything they care about first. Everyone they love becomes a target. That's why I keep my distance. That's why I refuse to give you a true claiming mark. Not out of nobility or restraint, but because I'm trying to keep you off its radar." Arden's heart hammered against her ribs, her wolf instincts responding to the dominant energy radiating from him. Yet beneath the fear, something else stirred, a recognition of the sacrifice behind his actions, the loneliness he had chosen as protection. "What if there's another way?" she asked, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "Your grandmother believed the debt could be transferred to a willing sacrifice." Lucian's grip on her shoulders tightened momentarily before he released her, stepping back as if burned. "Ilara should never have told you that. It's a theory, nothing more. An old woman's desperate attempt to save her son, my father, who died anyway. But what if—" "No." The word cracked like a whip in the quiet room. "I won't discuss this. I won't have another death on my conscience. Not yours, not anyone's." The raw emotion in his voice stopped Arden's argument before it could form. She realized then that this was perhaps the most honest conversation they had shared since their forced union, the closest she had come to seeing the man beneath the carefully constructed facade of the cold, ruthless Alpha. "I'm not asking to die for you," she said softly. "I'm asking to help you find a real solution, one that doesn't end with anyone's death." Lucian studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, "Why would you want to help me? After everything that's happened, everything that's been taken from you?" It was a fair question, one Arden had asked herself repeatedly over the past days. The answer came to her lips before she had fully formed it in her mind. "Because I know what it's like to feel powerless against forces beyond your control, to have your future decided by others." She took a steadying breath. "And because I'm tired of being afraid." Something shifted in Lucian's gaze. A softening, perhaps, or a recognition of the truth in her words. For a moment, it seemed as if he might reach for her again, this time with different intent. But the moment passed, and he stepped back, the walls rebuilding themselves behind his eyes. "Get some rest," he said, his voice returning to its usual controlled cadence. The northern nights grow colder as winter approaches. He turned to leave, but Arden called after him. "Lucian." He paused at the sound of his name. "We're stronger together than apart. Whatever this shadow is, it's counted on isolation to maintain its power. Perhaps that's the key to defeating it." Lucian didn't respond, but his hesitation at the door told Arden that her words had found their mark. As he finally left, the room felt strangely empty, as if he had taken more than just his physical presence with him. Outside, the moon rose over the mountains, bathing the northern palace in silver light. In the distance, a wolf howled, a mournful, solitary sound that echoed across the valley before fading into silence. The first snow of winter fell over the northern territory, transforming the harsh landscape into something ethereal and silent. 3 months had passed since Arden's forced marriage, and in that time, the northern palace had become less a prison and more a battlefield, not of weapons and warriors, but of wills and truths slowly revealed. After their confrontation in Arden's chambers, something had shifted between her and Lucian. The careful distance he had maintained gave way to a cautious alliance. They still maintained separate sleeping quarters, but now shared meals, council meetings, and, most significantly, research into the curse that threatened to claim his life. "This text mentions a ritual of binding," Arden said one evening, looking up from an ancient leather-bound tome in the palace library. Snow fell steadily outside the tall windows, casting the room in a soft, diffuse light. "It speaks of tying one's life force to another as protection against spiritual threats." Lucian, seated across from her with his own stack of scrolls, frowned. "Binding rituals are dangerous. They don't just protect, they merge. If one dies, both die. But if both survive," Arden pressed, marking the page with a slip of parchment, "then both are forever changed." His pale eyes met hers, something unreadable flickering in their depths. Bound souls never truly separate, even after death. The implication hung in the air between them, an intimacy more profound than physical claiming, a connection that transcended even the sacred bond between alpha and mate. Before either could speak further, the library door swung open, and Ilara burst in, her face flushed with cold and urgency. "Another disappearance," she said without preamble. "Marcus, from the Eastern Patrol. They found his cloak at the edge of Shadow Pass, but no body." Lucian rose to his feet, the weariness that had momentarily softened his features replaced by the sharp focus of the Alpha. "When?" "An hour ago. The patrol just returned." Ilara's gaze shifted to Arden, a silent apology in her eyes. "The council is gathering. They're saying it's a sign. A sign of what? Arden asked, though a cold dread in her stomach told her she already knew. The curse is accelerating, Lucian answered, his voice flat, moving beyond its traditional pattern. It's no longer just waiting for my 30th year. It's growing more active, more hungry. How much time do we have? Arden asked, rising to stand beside him. A muscle worked in Lucian's jaw. Less than I thought. The council meeting confirmed their worst fears. 4 disappearances in the past month, all near Shadow Pass, all without trace or trail. The white-bearded counselor, Thaddeus, spoke the words no one else dared. The pattern matches what happened before your father's death, my prince. The shadow grows impatient. Lucian sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of controlled tension. Beside him, Arden watched the council members exchange glances, laden with resignation and fear. None, she noticed, seemed particularly surprised or devastated by the implication that their alpha might soon meet his end. What do you propose? Lucian asked, his tone deceptively calm. We must consider the succession, a councilwoman replied. Your union with the Eastern Wolf has not produced an heir. And it won't, Lucian cut in sharply. I've made my position clear on that matter. Then perhaps your sister is not eligible for leadership by our own laws, Lucian finished, his gaze sweeping the room with cold authority. A convenient rule you all enforced when it suited your purposes. Arden felt a surge of anger at the council's transparent ambitions. They weren't concerned with saving Lucian, only with securing their own power once he was gone. What about breaking the curse? She asked, drawing all eyes to her. It was the first time she had spoken in a council meeting without being directly addressed. Surely that should be our priority. Thaddeus's expression shifted to something between pity and condescension. My dear princess, if there were a way to break the curse, don't you think we would have found it by now? Generations have searched. All have failed. Not all have tried, Arden countered, a plan forming in her mind as she spoke. The binding ritual in the ancient texts is a myth, another counselor interrupted. A fairy tale for pups. Then what would we lose by trying it? Arden demanded, turning to face Lucian. If it's a myth, nothing changes. If it works. The council chamber erupted in voices, some dismissive, others curious, but Lucian silenced them with a raised hand. His eyes, when they met Arden's, held a warning she understood all too well. This was not a conversation for public debate. The council is dismissed, he announced, rising from his chair. Double the patrols around Shadow Pass, but no one goes in alone, no exceptions. As the council members filed out, muttering among themselves, Lucian caught Arden's elbow, holding her back until they were alone in the grand chamber. What are you doing? He asked, his voice low and intense. Trying to save your life, she replied simply. By volunteering for a ritual that would bind your soul to mine? His grip on her arm tightened slightly. Do you even understand what you're proposing? I understand that you're running out of time and options, Arden said, refusing to be intimidated. And I understand that this curse thrives on isolation. It's separated you from everyone who might help you. Your sister, your pack, even your reluctant wife. Lucian's expression darkened. This isn't a game, Arden. The binding ritual, if it even works, would tie your fate to mine. If the curse takes me, it takes you too. And if it doesn't, she challenged. If the binding creates a protection neither of us could achieve alone. He released her arm, turning away to pace the length of the chamber. Why would you risk yourself like this? This isn't your fight. You made it my fight when you married me, Arden said, echoing her words from weeks earlier. But more than that, I'm choosing to make it my fight. For once, I'm making my own choice. Lucian stopped pacing, his back to her, shoulders rigid with tension. When he finally spoke, his voice held a vulnerability she had rarely heard from him. And if I refuse to let you take that risk? Arden moved to stand before him, forcing him to meet her gaze. Then you'd be doing exactly what the curse wants. Isolating yourself, facing it alone, becoming the easy target it expects. Something shifted in Lucian's eyes. A recognition, perhaps, or a reluctant understanding. This isn't what I wanted for you when I agreed to this marriage. What did you want? Arden asked softly. He hesitated, the question seeming to catch him off guard. For you to be safe, to survive the political machinations that would have seen you executed, to have some kind of future, even if it wasn't the one you would have chosen. The admission touched something deep within Arden, a recognition that beneath his cold exterior, Lucian had always acted with a certain moral center, even when it went against his own interests. "Let me help you," she said, not quite a plea but an offer. "Let us face this together." The silence between them stretched, filled with the weight of unspoken words and possibilities neither had dared to consider. Finally, Lucian gave a single, sharp nod. "If we do this," he said, his voice low and serious, "there's no going back. Our lives, our souls, they would be intertwined. Forever." Arden's heart beat faster at the implications, but her resolve remained steady. "I understand." Later that night, as snow continued to fall in silent sheets beyond the palace walls, Arden and Lucian met in the most ancient part of the keep, a circular chamber deep beneath the main structure, its stone walls carved with symbols older than the pack itself. Ilara was there, arranging items on a stone altar at the center of the room. Herbs, crystals, a silver bowl filled with clear liquid. Her face was drawn with worry, but her hands moved with confidence born of extensive preparation. "Are you certain about this?" she asked when they entered, her gaze moving between them. The texts weren't entirely clear on the consequences. "Few things worth doing come with guarantees," Arden replied, moving to stand beside the altar. Lucian followed more slowly, his expression guarded yet determined. "You've prepared everything as we discussed?" Ilara nodded, stepping back. "I've done all I can. The rest is up to you both." She hesitated, then added, "Whatever happens, I want you to know I'm grateful. Both of you." With those words, she left the chamber, the heavy door closing behind her with a sound like finality. Alone now, Arden and Lucian faced each other across the altar. The chamber was lit only by a circle of candles, their flames casting dancing shadows on the ancient walls. In this light, with his guard momentarily lowered, Lucian appeared younger, the burden of his impending fate visible in the tightness around his eyes. "Last chance to change your mind," he said quietly. Arden shook her head. "I've made my choice." Following the instructions they had pieced together from various texts, they began the ritual. First came the mixing of elements: water from the mountain springs, earth from the territories of both their packs, herbs of protection and binding. As Lucian spoke words in an ancient language, Arden added drops of blood from each of their palms to the mixture. The liquid in the bowl began to glow with a soft blue light, illuminating their faces from below as they continued the chant together. Arden felt a strange warmth spreading through her veins, a tingling sensation that started at her fingertips and radiated inward. "Now," Lucian said, his voice deepened with power, "we complete the bond." He reached across the altar, taking her hands in his. The moment their skin touched, a surge of energy rushed between them, so intense that Arden gasped. It felt as if a door had opened between their minds, allowing emotions and sensations to flow freely from one to the other. Fear, Lucian's, buried deep beneath layers of control. Determination, Arden's, burning like a flame in darkness. Loneliness, shared between them, a lifetime of isolation for different reasons. And beneath it all, something unexpected, a tentative warmth. A connection that had been forming slowly over months of cautious alliance, of shared purpose and growing respect. The blue light from the bowl rose around them, enveloping their joined hands, spiraling up their arms to surround them completely. Arden felt as if she were drowning and flying simultaneously, her consciousness expanding to encompass not just herself, but Lucian as well. His memories, his fears, his carefully hidden hopes. When the light finally faded, they remained connected, hands clasped across the altar, each staring at the other with new understanding. "Did it work?" Arden whispered, though she already knew the answer. She could feel him now, a presence in her mind like a shadow of herself, not intrusive, but complementary. "Yes," Lucian replied, his voice roughened with emotion. "I can feel you, your thoughts, your feelings." He trailed off, seemingly overwhelmed by the sensation. Arden gently extracted her hands from his, though the connection between them remained. "What happens now?" "Now," Lucian said, straightening his shoulders with renewed resolve, "we face the shadow." The next morning brought clear skies and biting cold, the snow glittering like diamonds under the winter sun. Lucian assembled a small group, himself, Arden, and 2 of his most trusted guards, for what he described to the council as a reconnaissance mission near Shadow Pass. "This is madness," Thaddeus had argued. "You're walking directly into its hunting grounds. Better to face it on our terms than wait for it to choose the moment," Lucian had replied, his decision already made. Now, as they approached the narrow ravine known as Shadow Pass, Arden felt a growing sense of dread that wasn't entirely her own. Through their new bond, she could sense Lucian's tension, his memories of finding his father's remains in this very place 10 years earlier. "You don't have to do this," she told him quietly as they dismounted from their horses at the entrance to the pass. Lucian's eyes met hers, a grim smile touching his lips. "Yes, I do, and so do you, now that we're bound." He turned to the guards. "Wait here. No matter what you hear, do not follow us in." The men exchanged uneasy glances, but nodded their understanding. Lucian and Arden continued on foot, the walls of the ravine rising steeply on either side of them, blocking out much of the sunlight. Despite the bright day, shadows seemed to gather here, deepening with each step they took. "I can feel it watching us," Arden whispered, a chill running down her spine that had nothing to do with the winter air. Lucian nodded, his hand moving to the knife at his belt, a ceremonial blade with symbols that match those in the ritual chamber. "It knows we're here. It's curious." They reached a point where the ravine widened into a small clearing, the ground covered in untouched snow, save for a single set of footprints that appeared to start in the center and lead nowhere. "Marcus," Lucian said grimly, recognizing the pattern of the missing guard's boots. "This is where it took him." Arden's wolf senses prickled with warning as the temperature around them seemed to drop suddenly. The shadows at the edges of the clearing deepened, taking on an unnatural density, as if the darkness itself were coalescing into something solid. "Lucian Thorne," a voice whispered, the sound seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You come early to your fate." Lucian's stance shifted, his body partially shielding Arden, though they both knew such protection was meaningless against what they faced. "I come to end it," he replied, his voice steady despite the fear Arden could feel radiating through their bond. "To break the curse once and for all." A sound like laughter, but twisted and hollow, echoed around them. "The debt cannot be broken. Blood was promised. Blood will be paid." The shadows moved, gathering into a vaguely humanoid shape at the center of the clearing, a figure of darkness with eyes that glowed like embers in the void. It stood where Marcus's footprints began, a silent confirmation of the guard's fate. "The debt was not mine to promise," Lucian said, taking a step forward. "I never agreed to this bargain, but you benefited from it," the shadow replied, its voice like ice cracking. "Your pack, your power, your very existence, all flow from the bargain Thorne made. The price must be paid." Arden stepped up beside Lucian, refusing to remain behind him. What if a different payment were offered? One freely given, not taken by force. The shadow's attention shifted to her, its burning gaze seeming to pierce through her physical form to examine the soul beneath. "You are bound to him," it observed, a note of surprise in its hollow voice. "Two souls intertwined where once was one. Interesting, but insufficient. The debt remains, not just bound," Arden said, drawing on courage she hadn't known she possessed. "Willing. We offer a new bargain. Not blood, but service." Lucian's shock rippled through their bond, but he quickly caught her meaning, adding, "1 year of our service, freely given, in exchange for breaking the curse that binds my bloodline." The shadows seemed to consider this, its form shifting like smoke in wind. Service. The children of wolves offering to serve the ancient darkness. What service could you possibly provide that would equal the power of your blood? "Protection," Lucian answered without hesitation. "The territories you once ruled have changed. Humans encroach on the wilderness. We can ensure your domain remains untouched, your existence unknown to those who would seek to destroy you out of fear." A long silence followed, the shadow's form growing more substantial as it considered their offer. Finally, it spoke again. 5 years, both of you, bound to this place, guardians of the passage between worlds, neither fully in your realm nor mine. Arden and Lucian exchanged glances, a silent communication flowing between them through their bond. 5 years of their lives, given to this place, to this duty. 5 years away from their packs, from the world they knew. "And after those 5 years?" Arden asked. "We would be free," The curse broken for all generations to come? The debt would be considered paid, the shadow confirmed. Your blood and that of your descendants would be your own once more. We accept, Lucian said firmly, taking Arden's hand in his. Through their connection, she felt not resignation, but resolve, and something else, a spark of hope for a future beyond the shadow of the curse. The being seemed to grow larger, shadows extending from its form to surround them. Then it is done. The old bargain is broken. The new one begins. A surge of energy pulsed through the clearing, and Arden gasped as she felt it flow through her body, through their joined hands, through the bond that connected their souls. For a moment, the world seemed to blur around them, reality shifting and reforming in subtle ways. When the sensation passed, the shadow had disappeared, leaving them alone in the clearing. But something had changed. A weight lifted from Lucian's shoulders, a darkness that had lingered at the edges of his consciousness now gone. It's done, he said softly, wonder in his voice. I can feel it. The curse is broken. Arden squeezed his hand, relief washing through her. But we're bound to this place now. 5 years as guardians. Lucian turned to face her fully, his pale eyes warmer than she had ever seen them. 5 years that I wouldn't have had otherwise. His free hand rose to touch her cheek, hesitant at first, then more certain. 5 years with you if you're willing. The question behind his words was clear, not just about their duty as guardians, but about the nature of their relationship moving forward. Through their bond, Arden could feel the emotions he had kept carefully hidden for so long, respect that had grown into admiration, reluctant affection that had deepened into something more profound. I'm willing, she answered, the words carrying all the meaning that lay unspoken between them. More than willing. His smile, rare and genuine, transformed his face. In that moment, he looked nothing like the cold, distant alpha she had been forced to marry months ago. Then perhaps this punishment has become something else entirely. As the winter sun began to sink toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow, Lucian bent his head and finally claimed her lips with his. Not a marking of ownership, but a gesture of partnership, of a connection freely chosen rather than forced. Through their bond, emotions flowed between them, no longer just the echo of each other's feelings, but a harmony of shared experience, of two lives now intertwined by choice as well as circumstance. 5 years as guardians of Shadowpass would not be easy. They would need to explain their arrangement to their packs, to establish new leadership in their absence, to adapt to a life balanced between two worlds. But as they walked back toward the entrance of the ravine, hands still joined, Arden felt a certainty that surprised her. The marriage that had begun as her punishment had transformed into something neither of them could have anticipated, a partnership forged in adversity, strengthened by shared purpose, and now, perhaps, blossoming into something that resembled the true mate bond she had once thought forever beyond her reach. At the entrance to Shadowpass, they paused, looking back at the place that would be their home and responsibility for the next 5 years. The shadows seemed less threatening now, the ravine less a place of dread, and more a sanctuary of sorts, a boundary between worlds that needed protection. Ready? Lucian asked, his voice gentle. Arden nodded, feeling the steady pulse of their bond between them. Ready, together, they stepped forward into their new life. No longer prisoner and jailer, no longer reluctant spouses, but partners in a destiny they had claimed for themselves. Guardians of the shadow, breakers of the curse, and architects of their own unexpected future. Behind them, as darkness fell over Shadowpass, a soft blue light began to glow along the walls of the ravine, not threatening, but protective, marking the boundary they now pledged to guard. And within that light, 2 wolves could be seen briefly, one silver, one dark, running side by side through the deepening shadows, free at last from the chains of the past. If you enjoyed this story, a like or comment really helps. And if you wish to hear more tales like this one, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next tale.